Todos los días desde el Festival Internacional de Literatura Gutun Zuria queremos agradecer la colaboración de BBK como patrocinador oficial de este festival, así como el de las instituciones públicas, privadas, medios de comunicación y medios de transporte que colaboran con este festival. Os recordamos que todas las conversaciones se pueden seguir en 3 idiomas, en euskera, castellano e inglés. In fact, the following conversation will be held completely in English, so if you can't understand it properly, you can still pick up the electronic translation devices outside the auditorium. Horrez gain, iluntzeko 9:00 Orhan Pamukek bere irakurleekin, zuekin guztiokin honen bestez, topaketa izango du erakusgelako sarreran eta bertan gura baduzue ardo tragoska bat ere eskainiko dizuegu. For Gutun Zuria Festival, it's a great pleasure having here with us today such a great writer. Con una firme e intachable actitud ética no han sido pocas las ocasiones en las que Orham Pamuk ha aprovechado su posición y su fama internacional para criticar duramente los sucesivos gobiernos, incluso la historia de su propio país. Como seguramente conoceréis, una vez dijo, 30.000 kurdos y 1 millón de armenios han sido asesinados en Turquía. Nadie se atreve a mencionarlo, por eso lo digo yo. Premio Nobel de Literatura, es autor, entre otros libros, de la novela El Museo de la Inocencia, considerado por muchos la gran obra sobre las cosas pequeñas, Me llamo Rojo, o también autor de Nieve. Conversará con la periodista y compañera Ana Aizpiri. Zuekin guztiokin, please, let's welcome Ana Aizpiri and Orham Pamuk.
Thank you. Mila esker guztioi. Gabon daizuela, oso pozik nago hemen zurekin guztiokin egotearekin. We are going to have the following conversation in English, as you know. It's going to have a length of an hour, approximately. Throughout this hour, I would be talking to Orham Pamuk. I really thank him from all my heart to have come to Bilbao, and I can't skip wishing him, thanking him, his presence here.
I'm also very grateful to be here.
Geldinish Bilbao, Orhan Bey.
And her Turkish is perfect.
Nasılsınız?
Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Tamam. He's paying my ear. Then we are going to be talking about his books. Obviously, we would concentrate on his main novels. I would be asking him about The White Castle, My Name is Red, as well as the Museum of Innocence, The Black Book, Istanbul, The Memories and the City. And we would be also talking a little bit about his ideas, his thoughts, his reflections on novel writing, on literature. This is on a small book, but a very interesting book he's got, which is based on the lectures he gave at Harvard University, the Norton Lectures. It's a compilation which is entitled The Naive and the Sentimental Novelist. And I really advise you to read it if you are interested in the authors he has been studying deeply and he has been following and analyzing throughout his career as a writer. Then, to start with, Orhan Bey, your name, Orhan, it has got a very profound Ottoman flavor.
It's, of course, actually, Orhan was the second Ottoman ruler, but it is a Turkic name. That is, there were Turks before Islam, you know. Turks were living in Central Asia. This is partly romantic imagination during the making of the Turkish Republic after 1880s to between 1880s to 1930s. Turks invented Turkishness. Actually, Ottoman Empire was not self-consciously Turkish, and at the beginning it was driven from Selçuk, the previous Anatolian Empire, roots, and Selçuks were more strongly Turkic, and at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, the second ruler's name was Orhan, one of the few Turkic names that the rest of the Ottoman rulers had Quranic Arab influence.
Like his father, in fact. His father
Osman
was
is
Osman,
no, Osman is part of the Arabic culture, but Orhan is all the names that end with Han, which means ruler or king of the city. Orhan means king of the city. And in fact, as I wrote in my autobiographical book, Istanbul, the second Ottoman Padishah, Sultan, Orhan, was not a very memorable person. And my mother, who was always asked us not to go out of the flock, not to be outstanding, but behave like everyone else. When the family, my brother's name was Osman, so that was the first Ottoman ruler. So he said Orhan, then that set the tone for the rest of my cousins and the whole family, imitating the third one, the Selim, Murad, and it continued like that. My mother wanted to name me Orhan, not because he was an important Ottoman Padishah, the other way around, because he was unimportant, he didn't do anything striking, and he wanted to be me to be like that, and I always listened to her advice.
He has got a very, he did open like a kind of refuge for dervish and
the refuge
for dervishes.
Yes.
For dervishes and the people who...
The Orhan. The only thing that history remembers about Orhan, he minced the first Ottoman coin. And mincing a coin is a sign and symbol that you are in power.
I see. I think that it is very important for us to ask you about the main traits of the Ottoman culture, because
wow, that's so,
if I'm not wrong, it's a mixture of things.
Well, madam, you didn't tell me that you're going to ask this in the examination, but I'll do my best. How much time do we have?
You have to do it briefly. I'm sorry.
Okay. The main traits of Ottoman Empire is, of course, it was an empire, and it was not nervous about distinct cultures and ethnic identities. If they don't uprise to the empire, Ottoman culture was a tolerant culture in relation to what the national narrow cultures do. Ottoman culture was interesting in the sense that it was a very extremely multi-ethnic empire, what today we call Middle East, Balkans, Crimea, Northern Africa, all parts of Turks proudly say, I am saying this modestly, of the Ottoman Empire. And in order to run an empire like that, you have to let the groups, various identities, be themselves. In fact, in 60s and 70s, left-wing intellectuals, when they're asking Turkish army, Turkish bureaucracy, intolerant, when they were still imposing one source for the Turkish identity, we begin to say that, well, we have to be a bit tolerant like Ottomans. Actually, they were not that tolerant too. They were medieval, so forth and so on. But in terms of being permissive about languages, different religions, Ottomans were more tolerant to compared to extremely nationalist Turks or Turks who were imposing one single identity to the richness and killing the richness of the culture.
So what was left on the Turkish culture from Ottomanism?
Many, many things.
The main ones.
Well, all the ethics of daily life, all the permissiveness, tolerance, if we are not talking of tolerance that we import from Europe, from democracy, free speech, human rights, feminism, These are things we learn from West, from Europe. But from Ottoman Empire, we learn another kind of tolerance of other religions, kama, that the whole culture of wine drinking, permissiveness in this or that, Sufi literature. There would not be any art and literature in Ottoman times if there were no Sufi sects, which were then by Kemal Atatürk closed after the implementation of modern Turkish Republic. Of course, the beautiful music, the poetry, unfortunately, very few can understand, and the architecture, Ottoman architecture. I'm still living among Ottoman architecture. Also, all the Sufi dictionary of resignation, going inward, mystical, a sort of a discovery of the self through mysticism. There was no other way. Though all of this institutionally cleared off, it stayed in people's, it stayed in the language, it stayed in the layers of history. I like that kind of, quote, Ottomanism. But I don't like Ottomanism when Turkish economy is booming in the last 1.5 decades, and then internationally or nationally, some journalists are writing, we're getting a strong race, Ottomans, and aggressive Turkish imposition of aggressively the Turkish image or Turkish success in an Ottoman way. I don't like that. I like to embrace the Ottoman culture in its complexity, in understanding and appreciating and putting on a pedestal the richness of human spirit, the resignation of the Sufi dervishes, which is perhaps can be compared in many ways to Dostoevskian inner life. These things I care about, but claiming other cultures, suppressing other peoples, this I don't want.
In fact, you have rescued some of this heritage in one of your books. Has it been in the one entitled The New Life, this Sufi poetry?
But I think I found my voice in Black Book.
In Black Book, you put.
And there, a sort of, my problem was to write about Istanbul, set a big major novel like James Joyce doing Dublin. I wanted to write a novel about a complex novel. Also, James Joyce taking his examples from Homer, while the Black Book is also appropriates Fariduddin Attar, Mevlana's stories, Sheikh Ghalib, early 19th century, very interesting poet who was also the leader, Sheikh of Mevlevi dervishes at the beginning of 19th century. I thought when I first went to the United States in 1985, I had what you would say a sort of a cultural crisis, and I realized, wow, the bigness. I was a local Turkish boy. Then my ex-wife was doing her PhD in New York, so I went there. I was already an established writer, and when I saw the vastness of American culture, Western culture, museums, culture, movies, libraries, all the other cultures, I had an anxiety and a nervousness of what is Turkishness, because up to then I was also a naive believer in the Republican idea. We are all Turks, we will have Western culture, which is, of course, never seemed contradictory to me. That was not deep. The previous generation of, I respect them, socially committed leftist writers that say best of which was Yaşar Kemal and other village novelists, were writing about people in the way John Steinbeck would, in the way Maxim Gorky writes, social problems, feudal lords, so forth and so on. Very respectful, but they missed the religion, the inner life of the Sufi, the inner life, the depths of inner life of the nation, and also language, complexities and darknesses, ambiguities of language. So when I decided that I will write a novel that will face all this. It will be sometimes hard, complex, but I am also a modernist. I want to be writing tough books.
Talking about innerness, there is a lot of it in your novel, The White Castle. No matter the novel starts with a battle, sort of. What was your idea, or did you have a precise aim when you wrote that novel, The White Castle?
Don't tell anyone, but I was influenced by Edward Said's Orientalism. You know, and then writers, when they are influenced by some philosophy, they are always naively influenced. And I was very naively influenced. They say, for example, Schiller was influenced by Schelling. I don't know. I can't follow, I don't know German, but then one day when I read, but didn't understand him enough. I think I also, it helps. Was not a sophisticated reader of Edward Said, but the idea that we come from cultures, the idea that the communication between cultures is important, or lack of communication between cultures is a main issue. And the second thing, I also wanted to write my version of doppelganger story. It was the German writer Hoffmann who invented We See Our Double. Then Pushkin wrote it, Dostoevsky wrote it, Edgar Allan Poe wrote it, Nabokov wrote it. There are so many double stories. Then in the late generation, Paul Auster and so many others did it. So why don't I write a double story and place it on Turkey's double spirit? That of Turkey belongs to Asian and Islamic culture, obviously, and also has aspirations to belong to Europe. And why don't I do a literary game about that? That is White Castle. It's more metaphysical and theoretical, or fable and fantasy. Like, I'm sorry, I'm
yes,
talking.
but then in the meantime, I would like to tell the audience, for the ones who have not read it, that it's very amazing how you describe all the inner feelings, the changes inside these two persons that meet, start being enemies almost. One is enslaved by the other. The Turkish enslaves the Italian. The Turkish works for the Sultan. He's commanded, he's demanded, asked by, he's a kind of counselor for the Sultan. At the beginning, they are very mischievous, one against the other, full of suspicions, almost enemies. So then later on, they start to wonder about themselves, if they are behaving correctly or not, and they reach, I could say, friendship even. So it seems as if you would be wanting to say one is Westerner, the other one is Easterner, as if being Easterner or being Westerner doesn't matter that much when it comes to engaging in a relationship, in a human relationship.
Thank you for a good summary. Thank you very much for it. That was the motivation to write the novel. That they were the essential ideas, and that's a short novel, metaphysical ideas, that made me go. Then, the wonderful thing about writing a novel is the ideas that you start with, in the end, unpredictable things happen, but I consider White Castle a sort of a metaphysical discourse, metaphysical literary discourse on identities.
Identity. I wanted to ask you about that, Orhan Bey. Mm-hmm. How do you define your identity?
Wow, well, so hard questions here.
We'll ask for a glass of wine, perhaps.
No,
for it to make
I
it
remember, now that we talked about Edward Said, I remember, I think this was in late 1990s, that there was a conference. I was also part of it, and I said, and someone said, Edward Said, what do you think of Palestinian identity, this or that? And do I agree? But that was a good starting point. He was angry because he didn't, when he was defending the rights of Palestinians, he was actually very palpable. This land belongs to us. This is mine. This is Edward Said's starting point. And instead of talking about that, people are talking about rhetoric of identity. And he said, all rhetoric, all talk about identity is bullshit.
But the Palestinians, as far as you started talking about that, they always say that they are somehow forced to be very attached to an identity, precisely because they have been disenfranchised and they have been robbed by their land. This is why they say they feel that so strongly.
Of course, you're not asking me.
That didn't happen with you, with the Turkish.
I'm a writer. A writer's identity is obvious. But then if you're asking Turkish identity, Ottoman identity, or I'm living in Istanbul, I would say that about the interesting thing about Turkish identity is that because it is carrying a strong weight of history, ethical, moral dilemmas of both wanting to be modern and secular and joining the global world in 1920s, 30s, and a desire to invent a Turkishness that is different from any other thing, which the only way of doing is reducing it to history, which is Ottoman history, and these ideas are contradictory. The essential element of Turkish identity, I would say, is being worried about what's my identity all the time.
That's an answer,
yes.
Certainly.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's go back to the Ottoman Empire time again, and I would like to mention some things about your book, My Name is Red, which is a gorgeous novel, certainly. There is one of the absent characters, we would say, because he hasn't got the word on the novel. It's that Sheikh of Erzurum, who has an array of followers who are very, very much on the persecution of the artists who work for the Sultan, again, for his glory.
Okay, but we have to insert here, he is not categorically against artists. Like many fundamentalists, he is against Sufism, or their tolerance to music, wine, or what we may today call performance art. That is, they're doing something in the lodge. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's necessary punctualization. I was wondering, while I was reading that, centuries passed away, centuries went, and we see that, again, as we see in that book, that I think that the orthodoxy was established more or less by the Quran, or the interpretation of the Quran, the sacred book of Islam. Centuries went, and we have seen cases like Salman Rushdie being given a fatwa against his life. We have seen Theo Van Gogh being killed by a fanatic. We have seen Roberto Saviano, we see these days, living in hiding because he's threatened by the mafia. What do you think about all that? Is it that...
But I don't think mafia in Italy is Muslim.
No.
Okay.
It's not, I mean, fundamentalism and fanaticism, it's not necessarily... Because fanaticism we've got here also, I understood as empowering and putting an idea in a pedestal above the life of human beings, I would say, in broad terms. Then what does all this make you think? That is to
First
say,
of all, I would not consider fundamentalism as the main attribution of Islam. That all religions have fundamentalists, even Marxism has fundamentalists and killers, but you don't judge a civilization, a teaching, a religion. There are, say, in the United States, where was this? In Arizona, that a guy threw a bomb and
At the
finished
FBI building.
FBI a hospital, killed, and everyone at the beginning thought it was Islamic fundamentalists, and it turned out to be, was that Arkansas, Nevada?
Yes, that was the FBI building.
Anyway,
John
then
Bennett.
I don't judge Christianity by that, and I expect that there will be Osama bin Ladens or whoever's all the time, and there will be Osama bin Ladens of Christianity. In Israel, there are ultra-fundamentalists, but I don't judge these civilizations by fundamentalists. There are fundamentalists. I advise there are terrorists. There will be terrorists. I believe in Louis Buñuel's ironical take on them. Just ignore them, wear a helmet if they're around, and follow your serious studies. And don't judge a civilization by the terrorists. That's a misleading thing.
Then again, about My Name is Red, you have said that it is your most optimistic novel.
Yes,
Can you
because
elaborate?
yes, I agree, because it's written with the joy of talking about painting. You know, I wanted to be a painter between the ages of 7 and 22. I think looking at painting...
It's a long time to be wanting to be a painter.
Yes, but no, I was
You
also
painted.
painting all the time. When I was 7, I drew a pigeon or a crow, and my family and everyone said, "My God, he will be Picasso, he's so talented," which I believed, and my mother gave me an empty flat. I used a studio, and everyone expected me that I will be a prominent Turkish painter, which didn't work out. Another subject. Actually, I wrote about this subject in my autobiographical Istanbul, that there is not one single answer why I did not, in the end, stopped painting, why I stopped painting. I myself could not answer that with one single line, but my autobiography ends at the age of 23, where I say, I won't be a painter, I won't be an architect, I will be a writer. But the whole book explains it. So, My Name is Red was a joyful novel because I was writing about what I knew from my heart and with joy, the joys of painting. You make a painting, your hand does it, your intellect is not aware of what it is doing, though the eyes are enjoying it. I believe, for me, the greatest joy of being in this world is seeing things. And in fact, I also did an excerpt from Quran saying, seeing is a great thing, I think. Seeing is, I think, being. And then all the enthusiasm of desiring to be a painter, seeing things, noticing differences, shades of color, other people's pictures. I love to go to museum. I love to look at pictures. I consider, whenever I look at a picture, I feel myself younger. I love to go to cinema.
I swear that he likes seeing and watching very much. I saw it throughout today. So just we open a hyphen from these Ottoman Empire things, and My Name is Red. What's your impression after having been watching Bilbao?
Oh, okay. I've been to Guggenheim. Here it is. It's architecturally wonderful. But that I will go to Old Bilbao Museum to see the paintings.
You will go there, good. Then we go back to...
That's a good museum, but to enjoy the paintings, I should go to the old one.
You will enjoy certainly there, I'm sure. We go back again to My Name is Red. Tell us a little bit about the making of this novel, in what concerns writing, and also, did you write it, by the way, where you were in Istanbul, or were you in the States?
I'm trying to, all of My Name is Red is written in Istanbul.
In Istanbul.
Half of Black Book is written in New York. And in fact, I was also saying, just like Joyce wrote Ulysses in Trieste, I am writing my Black Book in New York, and I was proud of that. But My Name is Red had this problem or ambition. Islamic painting is illustrative manuscript painting. It is a very limited subject, while compared to Western painting is a big. Compared to it, if Western painting is a magnificent palace, Islamic painting, I'm talking about space, work here, is
quantity.
a little, yes, quantity here, thank you, is a little tiny room. But even if it's a tiny room, it is interesting because it is about what John Berger said, waves of seeing. We look at a picture, our eyes enjoy a picture, but we are also, the picture suggests a philosophy of world, our understanding of the world. So I decided, first, why don't I write about this? I began My Name is Red first as a contemporary Turkish painter, like me, because I wanted to be a contemporary Turkish painter, and failed. But then I realized that contemporary Turkish painting, imitating Western painting, Impressionists, this or that, would be a discussion on imitation, authenticity, subjects that we as Naipaul address, say, in Mimic Man. Interesting subject, but a bit nasty subject, which I didn't want to go in. All the subject of authenticity is a great subject for the non-Western person as long as he wants to be like a Westerner. But once you lose that desire, authenticity is not an important thing. And I was losing that. I wanted to write about joys. That's why I say it's a happy book. I wanted to write about joys of painting, how happy I was when I was painting. So I decided that the reign of Murad III, he is Suleiman's grandson. There was...
We are talking about the 18th? Or
this is 1591, late 16th century. There was immense production in what we today call Persia, from Tabriz to Herat. Herat is now in Afghanistan. There were various ateliers, thank God to the heavy work of some scholars. We have information about these paintings. Then there was also, at this age, going to Mughal, India, Agra, Delhi, to Istanbul. There was very busy centers, and just like in Renaissance Italy, artists were going from town to town getting commissions. There was a little bit of a sort of a renaissance that failed because of this, because of that. I am not Max Weber. And then most of this painting was illustrative. So I want to explore, theorize, very ambitious book, and write about these painters. And since most of these paintings were illustrative, that is, behind the words, stories come first. Say, Leyla and Mejnun, Hüsrev ile Şirin, or Shahname of Firdevsi. So they are first books. Then, in order to embellish them, make them even better, and sultans can break the ban in Islam of pictures because they're sultans and they're stronger than religious whoever's. The sultan may chop off the head of the religious leader. So they can enjoy the painting.
Break the borders.
Break the borders. Not only. So, My Name is Red, and it is like that. would be a sort of a follow-up of both the visual culture of Ottomans, Persians, Mughals, and the literary culture of Persians, Ottomans, and Mughals. And I had also a modest political aim. All this culture in Republican Turkey was suppressed because
when the Republic was born.
After the Republic, because of westernization, because of narrow understanding of national identity and literature, the wealth of this culture was suppressed. Yes.
So you decided to
So
write, to paint with words, right?
I decided to first paint with words.
Okay.
Imagine that culture. Also, this 1591, Shakespeare was alive in England. Write about what's happening here when Shakespeare was doing that. And also put into Turkish national literary culture this rich, extremely rich culture. I always say that the suppressed culture. Freud used to say that what is suppressed comes back in disguise. And I used to say that the suppressed Ottoman culture comes back in disguise, and my disguise was postmodernism.
Your disguise was postmodernism, but not certainly of the majority of the Turkish people.
Sorry?
You say that
The majority
that
of Turkish people loves my books.
I know that. Well, just another question on the same book. So what did you do exactly? Did you travel to these faraway cities as Tabriz?
No, okay,
Herat,
that's
etc.,
irony of ironies, that the great wealth of Islamic visual culture is better preserved, unfortunately, in West. After the Khomeini's revolution in Iran, they are the only ones who are claiming back miniatures. The rest of the world, rest of the Islamic governments or secular or whatever governments don't pay attention to claim back that culture.
Where are they the most important?
Sorry?
Where are the most important miniatures?
There are so many places in Metropolitan, in Chester Beatty Library, in Dublin. There are in Paris, Bibliothèque Nationale. Of course, Topkapı Palace.
Topkapı you've got,
and
right?
one of the biggest collections is also in Topkapı Palace because during Safavid period, before 1520s, all the small princes of what we today call Persia were fighting with each other, and whoever won over would take the harem and the library. And then Ottoman Sultan Yavuz Sultan invaded Tabriz and got all the manuscripts of the richness of Persian culture and carried them to Istanbul. On the other hand, they were not easily available to me. I made friends with, at that time, Filiz Hanım, the president of the Library of Topkapı Palace. She later promoted to be the president, and she was very supportive and understanding. Now I thank her. Mm-hmm.
Good. You have said that another difficulty of writing this novel was expressing the way people talked at that time. So what did you do to avoid that
question,
difficulty?
Thank you. I think it was Margaret Yourcenar who addressed the real literary problem that lay at the heart of historical fiction. She wrote words to the effect, I may be mistaken about that, that humanity had learned to record our voices in late 1890s, at the end of 19th century. Before that, thousands and thousands of years and hundreds of languages, civilizations, and nations, everyone is talking, no one is recording. What was recorded was always governmental official language, and sometimes, most of the time, they recorded in a different language. So the way we talk now is I say, can I have some water? Please close the window. If you do that, I'm going to beat you. Kind of very down-to-earth daily conversation in 99% of life of humanity is never recorded. Okay, so how do you write a historical novel?
Given that you have to put some conversation on
yes, there is no novel without conversation. And also we are using Flaubert-like sentences in the way that some of the sentence includes my dictionary in my mind and also reality. How do you write about this? How do you, in Henry James' word, see the story? With what lexicon, with what words do you see the story? Okay, I'm not talking about, oh, that Turks didn't use that word at that time. That's not the point. That syntax of the language, the way we talk, the way we, that's not recorded. So what do you do?
What did you do?
You invent. You explore. A serious novel is a serious attempt to what history forgets. In My Name is Red, not only I tried to invent Islamic aesthetics of Islamic painting, no one did it. There was Vasari in Renaissance in early 16th century. There was no Vasari in
at that time, in the 16th
and also
century.
Ottoman, Mughal, Persian book production, book patronage paid ultra attention to calligraphy because it's Arabic and God's word and whoever using is most expensive. Painting is by the side, little guys, you know, let's do a bit color here, so they do. While the roles are changed now, calligraphy, no one understands it anymore. It's abstract painting at most, while looking at paintings, this we have learned from West. But I always say that, and this should be invented, that in West, you look at a picture like this, like you're looking an icon, like as if you're in a church and looking at Jesus Christ. No, this is serious now.
Really?
While in Islamic manuscript looking, you do this. It's an intimate thing. It is not an icon to put on a wall. You go to a museum, you look at it, the picture is your standing up, the picture is in your eye level. In a Muslim painting, you're sitting, you're alone. This is not a public action, and you are going inward.
But then again, those illustrated books, those precious books, were made for the people in power. In fact, I mean,
yes, sure. Islamic painting is no popular art. It's just assumptions thing that were never modernized.
Now we have to talk about Istanbul necessarily.
Sure.
It is crystal clear that you are very much in love with your city, where you have put the setup of some of your novels, isn't it?
Yes.
How many of them?
I think Snow takes place in northern eastern town of Kars, but there are some chapters that take place in Istanbul. The New Life, again, takes place in bus rides in 1980s and 70s Anatolia.
In Basra, city of Basra.
Bus drives, but also there are, again, Istanbul chapters. All of my novels take place in Istanbul, but it's not that I'm a tourist there. There were times in my life that I didn't leave the city for 20 years because Istanbul is my country, you know. And I always say this, that I was not self-conscious about belonging to Istanbul. When my books begin to get translated, everyone begin to call me, oh, you're the writer of Istanbul. And I said, yes, this is true. And I begin to get a bit self-conscious about it, both good and bad. In the end, I came across humanity in Istanbul, and that made, I'm saying all this because first, I care about human beings. First, I care about culture, text, this or that. Then comes the city.
In your book, Istanbul, The Memories and the City, you dedicate several pages to explain the meaning of a word that comes from Arabic, no matter Arabic was not the language of Turkey, nor of the Ottoman Empire, but there are lots of roots of Arabic in Turkish language, and you talk a lot about hüzün.
Hüzün is...
What is it, hüzün?
Hüzün has Arabic roots. It's in Quran. Hazin is sad. Hüzün is a Turkish take on the world, and it is a sort of, I explain in the book, Turkish Istanbul melancholy. When I was writing, let me tell the story of the book. When I was finishing or about to finish Snow, I said to my agent, I also wrote a lot of essays about Istanbul. Why don't we do a book about it? Then I realized that I don't want to do a compilation of essays, but I want to write an original book on Istanbul. In fact, my memoirs. And then I always remember Friedrich Nietzsche said that strong historian writes strong person, strong historians write about history, weak historians write about their memoirs. I am a weak historian. But I realized that my Istanbul book will be, so I decided that it will be my autobiography as well. Then, since I wanted to be a painter and heavily and very seriously, took myself very seriously, a painter, then I begin to realize that I begin to write about I was drawing a lot of like
Sketches.
Monet, Utrillo, Pissarro. I was doing Istanbul paintings, taking photos when I was 15, 16 in high school, then going home and doing Istanbul cityscapes. Then I begin to think, also influenced by mid-19th century, a group of French thinkers, Baudelaire, Gérald de Nerval, they were very much interested in painting and discovered the idea that the impact of a landscape painting is related to the feeling it evokes on us, on the gazer. So I said, what does Istanbul landscapes, what is the feeling Istanbul landscapes give me? And it was melancholy or hüzün. There I'm also influenced by Octavia Paz's Labyrinth of Solitude, which is an ambitious attempt to understand the Mexican spirit. I disagree with some of the arguments in that book, but I respect the ambitions of that book, that an essayist is honestly trying to discover what is being a Mexican. I also said, what is being a Turk? What is being a Turkishness? Then landscape and hüzün. There was overabundance of word hüzün, especially in Ottoman music, and modern Marxist poetry was also full of hüzün, and they were proud to say it, hüzün, hüzün, Marx, all contradictory, but they were doing that. So I made a theory of all this, arguing that this is related to visually, and this was also Montaigne's argument. Montaigne, besides his essays, went a little book of a travel to Italy, where when he sees all the Roman ruins, he associates Roman ruins with melancholy. Later, Edgar Allan Poe is also better in associating with old castles and ruins and Gothic landscapes with, again, sadness. His poetry is like that. This gave me the idea of looking at, and I've lived in my childhood among the ruins of Ottoman Empire, wooden houses. My high school everything was, and then they all burned down and burned down and burned down in my childhood. And they really gave me the melancholy Montaigne felt. So I said, and that the essential feeling I had in 50s, 60s, it changed. Now Turkey is a rich country, and you don't get this melancholy. It changed, but when I was in 50s, 60s, 70s, Istanbul was definitely a melancholic city, and then Turkish hüzün has also a philosophical, ethical side influenced by Ottoman mysticism. I can now, in fast way, compare it to what some scholars said about Japanese culture, that of nobility of failure.
Nobility of failure.
Yes, that you don't want to win in life. In all Turkish melodramatic films, the boy never gets the beautiful girl, and he has resignation is aristocratic distinction in Ottoman culture. All Sufi sects are not about making money and success, but having nothing, living like a hermit, and going inward, at most the glory of writing beautiful texts.
To be as close as possible from God.
Yeah, but God is too about. This is more about lifestyle, culture, resignation. So I wrote about my childhood in following this philosophy.
Yeah, you also write about lifestyle, I would say, a lot in your novel, huge novel, The Museum of Innocence.
Yes.
And many people have wondered, as all of us who have read Museum of Innocence, how much of Orhan Pamuk is in Kemal Bey?
Okay,
I have
yes.
to ask that.
Yes. But you know, I answered that question in Naive and Sentimental Novelist, but that's a very good question. My novel, Museum of Innocence, is, let's not talk about the real museum now, is a novel of love. I think that love is common to human heart everywhere. We all more or less behave, when we fall in love, behave in a similar way. We can write a comparative study of the person who is infatuated by love. Finished. B, that, of course, the forms and styles and the way of love also depends on gender, class, culture, civilization. The story in Museum of Innocence, the love that I described there, is seen through the eyes of upper-class, rich, Istanbul, spoiled male boy. The most unlovable person, perhaps. That's the weakness of the book. But we forgive this spoiled boy at the end of the book because he suffers like a Sufi because of love. Then, in the book, I also decided not to put love on a pedestal like pop songs and what a beautiful thing, but in a Proustian way, try to treat it in a seriousness. This is what happens to us when we fall in love. We get jealous, we got angry, we try to negotiate, so forth and so on. Now I said negotiate, but love in Istanbul in 1970s, even among upper classes, negotiation was hard. In a culture where sex out of marriage is problematical, is illegal, of course no one cares when it comes to love, but then that makes the ground for negotiation of your love very limited. Then I also wanted to write about this culture of secret negotiation, raised eyebrows, insisting, do you want another meatball or shall I give you an olive oil dish? This tenderness means more in a culture where boy and the girl cannot talk. When you say it has much, much more suggestive information because
Yes.
you cannot talk.
But nonetheless, the persons, most of the characters on that novel, these people that belong to affluent families, they do talk about the issues.
The boy is affluent,
Yeah.
but the girl is her mother is Taylor, but they are both westernized and secular. The love story in Museum of Innocence is not trans-cultural. It's in, and I wrote Museum of Innocence, enjoying, remembering, not caring what the editors or publishers say, right, economically. This time, I wanted to exhaust all I knew and do a big fresco of Turkish bourgeoisie and its
contradictions.
Contradictions, exactly.
And then tell us about the museum you opened. What came first, the idea of the museum or the idea of the novel? Or was it at the same time?
It came together. I wrote the novel. At first, I wanted to do a museum, but this is such an ambitious thing to confess, you know. Beginning in early 1990s, when my books, thank God, began to get published internationally, I was invited to festivals, book promotion tours, and whenever I went to Europe, and before that I rarely went to Europe, only once. Whenever I went to Europe, I will, in between interviews, in my spare time, I will go to, of course, museums. I'm not talking about big museums like Louvre or British Museum, but I used to go to small museums, say Musée Gustave Moreau, and I loved them because for me, they looked like novels. They were expressions of clever, creative individuals who wanted to leave a mark of, leave a posterity. And I also begin to think, can't I make a museum with the money I'm making with my novels? Very ambitious.
So you joined some friends for that project, didn't you?
Then I begin to think of both, and I also instinctively begin to buy from flea markets old things by just following my own humors. Then I begin to think that I collect all these objects in a story, put them in a museum where the family lives, and make a museum where at the beginning the form of the Museum of Innocence was a museum catalog without pictures, but where the annotations in the catalog were long and manipulated in such a way that you read the museum catalog without the pictures like a novel, because it says, say, an apple. Adam and Eve, when we first met, he was, so every object has a story, and when you put all these stories together, it's a novel. Then later, I decided to be old-fashioned. Forget about the shape of an annotated catalog and publish it just like a novel. And I was planning at the beginning to open the museum and publish the book at the same time, too ambitious. There were also political pressures on me, and I didn't have enough money, so if I publish the book, maybe make some money and pour it into the museum. And a Nobel Prize also helped, and in the end, I managed it.
So what happens nowadays with that
The museum is running on its own. I opened the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul 2 years ago. It is more or less exhibiting all the objects that I collected. Some of them I later made, and also films of Istanbul, films that I cut. And of course, I was not alone. Now, there were a group of artists. And by the way, that was a very happy period of my life because I was not alone writing in a room, but I was working with some 10 or 12 artist friends when I was especially finishing the museum. So the museum belongs to a foundation that I established.
And we can visit it.
You can visit it. It's open every day except Mondays between 10 and 6. If you have a copy of a book, it's free to enter. And don't forget that the museum I'm not putting any money on it. The visitors' tickets is sustaining it, all the people who are working it. I hope it continues. If it doesn't, I'm going to come and beg from you.
Then now we are going to move eastern from Istanbul. We are going to move to the city of Kars, which is not far away from the Georgian border, isn't it?
Yes.
And then, what was your idea? What pushed you to write that so very political novel?
That I live in Turkey, such a political country, its problems never finish. Then I said to myself, one day, only once, and this I said before I even published the book, I will write one political novel in my life and express my essential criticism of Turkish society, both seculars and conservatives, liberals and utopians. And my take on it is very simple. I will even simplify this, that all the values that come from West, feminism, human rights, free speech, democracy, secularism, so forth and so on, Western enlightenment, I believe in these things.
Which are the things that the poet, the main character of the book, believes in.
My character also believes, and I politically, or more so, the essential contradictions that make my character Ka are the essential contradictions also that I have. My character believes in these things, but the more he believes in these things, the more he doesn't belong to his nation. They say, you're not like, you're a European. They don't like him. But he wants to belong to his nation. Also, he wants to hold to these ideas. And
then the atmosphere, it's very oppressive. It's beautiful in the meantime, the way you write, etc. But it's cold. It's like gloomy. There are scenes of torture. All of a sudden, assassinations. There are these ladies, young ladies that suicide.
Those, for example, in the book.
Then I just wanted to point one thing. In the meantime, there is a sense of poetry. There is the protagonist. He's a poetry writer, and there is also this poetry in the novel that makes it very much variable. Otherwise, it would be very oppressive. So I wanted to ask you if you wanted to mean something specially, putting this poetical feeling, this poetical, we could say, view of the
I think
character.
Literature and poetry is a symbol for literature, comes out of when we are pressured from so much, but when we don't give up, then a new thing, a third new thing comes. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the writer of Great Gatsby, a great writer, very talented writer, once said words to the effect that if you have two contradictory ideas you strongly believe in, then you can write a good novel. More or less, my life is believing in two contradictory ideas, maybe, that of the great ideas of West and a desire to belong to my culture, nation, Istanbul. They contradict. There is no solution. Life is that clash. So I also invented a story. Military coups, secularism of the army. Secularism is a good thing, but if you can sustain it with military coup, is that a good thing? So many other things.
The complexity of situations.
You have to respect the rights of women to wear headscarf if they wanted, but will that stay only there, or will it be more a symbol and a victory of repressing the woman through Islam? So forth and so on. There are so many of them. And I was also angry to previous generation of Turkish writers who all knew these problems but ignored them, or who wrote about Turkish people as if they didn't have any religion, ignored it because that didn't look nice, that didn't look positivistically nice or whatever. So I wanted to be honest and do also make people read a little bit, also make it look like a bit thriller, a page turner, because it was too philosophical, or I also wanted my hard politics to be understood by, so there's also who did what kind of urgency in the novel.
Then, about writing novels, about novelists, you have said that the ideal of a novelist would be reaching the balance between the naive novelist as that one that writes from his stomach, we would say, without more considerations, to say it briefly, and the sentimental novelist who would be the thoughtful one.
But let me explain what Friedrich Schiller meant by that. Friedrich Schiller wrote an essay about not novelists, but poetry, admiring and also being a bit jealous of Goethe, his contemporary, and who was a stronger poet than himself. That Schiller felt that Goethe was writing his poetry as if it comes from nature, as if it comes from God, meaning that he was not calculating the effect, he was not thinking about moral solutions, and he was not aware of the techniques he used. He was, Goethe taught Schiller, wrote very naively. While his mind was, Schiller's mind was busy with so many moral issues, techniques, is this convincing, is this beautiful, while Goethe wrote like God. So I argue in naive and sentimental novelists, we novelists have both sentiments. That when I write a novel, I sometimes write that it's coming from outside, and I sometimes calculating, rewrite, talk with the editor, so forth and so on. And I also argue in this book, in my lectures, Norton lectures in Harvard University, I also argue that novel readers also do that. There are naive readers who read a book like they read Bible, it comes, they never question anything. And there are also sentimental readers who think everything is calculated.
We're
it's not.
Analyzing all the time. Now I'm going to give the floor to our audience for them to put questions to you on your books, on what do you think about literature, what do you like, what's your process of work, etc. But before giving them the floor, I would like to put you a final question, which would be concerning this last point you were talking about. In which of your novels do you think you have attained this balance in between the naive novelist and the sentimental novelist?
The naive person in me wants to say, in all of my novels. The sentimental person in me wants to say, never I can achieve that. In my next novel, I hope. I think my name is Red is a balanced. That's why I say it's a happy novel.
That's why you feel it optimistic.
Yes, it's a happy book because that balance is there. Yeah. Black Book is dense. I'm proud of it, but it's more sentimental and calculated.
It would be therefore harder to read.
No, but somehow. It's also poetic, In good novels, you don't have to understand everything. That's very...
Just for the pleasure of it, for the pleasure of the words. Okay. The floor is yours. Please, go ahead.
Right, they were there.
We have to stop. We don't leave yet. He loves photography also, as you can see. Please, go ahead.
People are shy to ask the first question. Please start from the second one. And don't ask too many political questions, please. Yes.
Nahi duzuenean, aurrera. Antxe bat, gizon bat?
Maybe we wait for the microphone. Microphone is coming.
He's asking about the situation. You have to put on your...
okay, but he's asking in English.
Which is your point of view of the situation of the woman in Turkey nowadays?
There are not, when you say nowadays, there is not one single, there is not a new development on that issue. More or less, after Kemal Atatürk's program of women's rights, as the country gets richer, I think women are getting a bit stronger. Also, as I wrote in my Snow, headscarf issue is not a black and white issue. It's a very complicated issue if you wear a headscarf and if you're living in a provincial town, then you can have a job. But if you refuse to wear a headscarf, you can't even go out in provincial towns. It's the issue of free speech, so forth and so on. But it's hard to make a generalization about the later developments. It's not a high political issue if you leave aside the headscarf issue. During the time of this government, which they were in power for 12 years, only 1.5, 2 years ago, it's 65% of Turkish women by naturally, not because politically, because their families do it, wear a headscarf. Now they can, in the last 2 years, they can go to university with their headscarf or work in some governmental offices, but that wearing a headscarf is not the only feminist issue in Turkey. Turkey is typical of Islamic countries, perhaps compared to the rest, women are, the situation is better. And also, as far as wages for our women's rights, definition of women's rights, acceptance of home labor as distinct labor. In these issues, Turkey is behaving like third world country.
Thank you very much. Another one, please. Isn't it reassuring?
But maybe everyone asks one question.
Okay. Hi. Yeah.
So I don't know who was
Hello.
first.
Yeah.
First here and then over there, Carmen. Oh, who was?
Also,
I'm sorry.
please raise your hands so that we don't wait.
Okay, 1, 2, and 3 over there, and
Yes.
then 4. So we can make it like as short as we can, please. The questions, I mean, for him to be able to answer shortly also and give all of you the opportunity.
Sí, buenas tardes. Quería saber qué presencia y qué relevancia tienen los maestros sufís en este momento en la cultura turca.
But then, okay, can you?
Yeah, she is asking you which is the importance and the presence of the Sufi teachers nowadays.
Okay, the Sufi sects were banned in the early days of Turkish Republic. They are still banned. Sufi activity in Turkey is illegal, although we have a so-called Islamist government.
Okay, so there is Carmen over there, in the middle of that, the same row. Now you are going to receive a question from a lady who is a Turkish language teacher.
Well, but I think I can talk English, maybe. If you want, I can talk Turkish.
Yeah, English is going to be better for all of us, please.
Okay. I would like to ask you, what do you think, I mean, you were talking many times about the human rights and this, and what do you think about the corruption in the world, and maybe in the world you know, how can we change the corruption? I think.
Oh, okay. The question is, I understand, about corruption in government. Literature cannot change these things. It is in the human nature to get bribes, to be corrupted. I don't think any system can change it, but more democracy, more openness, free speech, as we all know, helps. We all know that in China, if you can criticize corruption, that it stops. But if you cannot do it, then it even gets more. But we novelists cannot do much about these things except sign petitions and complain in interviews.
There were some over there.
Hi.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, you before talk about authors being jealous about each other. That's not your case because everybody's jealous about you. But I want to know if you read contemporary literature and which literature you like.
Contemporary literature.
In world literature?
Yeah. What do you read if you read contemporary authors?
Okay, first, who I'm going to solo here. He influenced my black book when I found my voice. I salute him here. Now you're asking me, there's so many writers, so many books. I think I was in Picasso Museum in Barcelona, and there I saw a little thing that weak artists get influence, smarter ones, words to the effect, steal. I essentially read other writers to get things from them. But I cannot name you national literature. I like, for example, he's dead now, Thomas Bernhard. I admire him a lot. I like Zadie Smith, very, very talented writer. But then you ask me names and I say good or bad, but
Woman.
now,
What about woman? Do you read woman?
but I don't want, yeah, okay, you're right. Then I like Peter Handke, who has horrible politics, but a very good, interesting writer. So it's very complex. Then also, one writer may write one or two goods, but then the third one is not that interesting. It's very complex. And I am not a professor who would be saying, promoting literatures. I look at literature as something that would make me happy, motivate me. But I'm not a professor of history of literature.
Whereas somehow you are.
Yes, that's how I make my money, but...
Okay, more hands rising over there. Yes, please.
I had... it's me.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I had a good question, I think, about your Museum of Innocence, but you have already answered it. But I have another one. And it is that, what was your approach when you thought of setting your museum? Was it a complement, an illustration to your literary ideas? Or did you have an aesthetic approach, an artistic approach, thinking of making small, everyday things beautiful to many people, to everybody?
Really good question. At the beginning, when I collected the objects, my office, an apartment was full of them, very dusty now, and I also already had the building because I needed the building because if the story takes place in that neighborhood, all issues of class is necessary, you have to know. So I also worked with a friend, Turkish architect, to make the building visible. Then I also worked with a group of German architects. But I was at the beginning, just as your question implies, only naively thought of, well, if this is Füsun's something, this is Kemal's glass, let me put them on some place, on a table. Objects matter. But when I begin to think seriously of museums, I had a desire to make a museum, but I realized, wow, that is a tough job. Then I realized then that a museum is not only a place where you exhibit objects, but you exhibit them in a manner, in an ambiance, in an atmosphere. And that is more important than the objects themselves. In the end, for example, I had a collection of Turkish matchboxes of all the period, not hard to find. I had a collection of, say, nutcrackers of the period, but they were not, as I could not find a way of aesthetically making them rewarding, beautiful to the eye. I deleted them. So in a way, I begin to develop aesthetic ambitions. I decided that my museum will not be a storage of objects, but it will be an atmosphere where it will hold the objects. In midpoint, when I was writing the book and collecting the objects, I realized that the logic of display in the museum would be following the novel's chapters. In fact, I also wrote the novel like that. Remember, it all began like an annotated museum catalog where the annotations are so long and manipulated so carefully that it reads like a novel. So I already had that idea. So then I begin to think of these vitrines, Joseph Cornell-like boxes, some of them also influenced by other artists, think them in a very aesthetic way. Then after a while, I begin to draw them. I already drew some of them. Also, as I wrote the novel and as I was collecting photographs, objects, I already writing the chapter and drawing the box the best time, doing both, what I wanted to do in life simultaneously. So I needed the help of my German architect friends, Sundar Plasman family, because they were very good in museum light. My Museum of Innocence works so well, or that's what I think, because the techniques of lighting, putting lights inside the objects, all the new technical things, I had the help of Sundar Plasman family, who are maybe the top people in Germany in museum lighting. So many, many things, but also about the effect of the museum. My Museum of Innocence is not an illustration of the novel Museum of Innocence. Also the numbers tell us, we have statistics, that the number of people who come to the museum and who had not read the novel is more than half of the people just come to the museum. They have not read the novel, but they've heard that there is a strange thing. A novel, a museum is made up of the objects that are real or hypothetical objects in the museum. They come. In the end, what if I also had observed people in the museum. At the beginning, they say, oh, the first chapter, objects. Second box, third box. After 5 or 6, people forget about the novel, but get carried by the ambiance, the atmosphere of the museum. The boxes, vitrines, tell a story by themselves or give you a feeling of a different world made up of just petty, tiny, banal, daily life objects. If I were to put all these objects that I collected on tables or white cubes or whatever, that would be, I would have finished a museum 3 years ago, than the year I opened it. But I didn't want that. I didn't want to make this only a simple, naive exhibition. I was ambitious, so I wanted to create an atmosphere. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Who else over there? Yes, please.
Sí. Yo leí Nieve, que me pareció una obra maestra, y más que admirarle, le cogí envidia. ¿Qué opina de los lectores envidiosos?
But then there's no translation here.
He read Snow, and he enjoyed it a lot. And in the meantime, he was very envious of you What do you think about the envious readers?
Yeah, I understand that feeling. I also feel the same way. The best way is to write your novel.
Yes, please.
So it's a great compliment. Thank you so much.
Please, over there.
Yo.
Okay, first of all, we'll leave this lady. Then I give you just a second.
Okay. Orhan Pamuk, hoş geldin Baskı ülkesine.
Just a second. There is just a second. I'll give you the floor after the lady.
Okay.
Didn't someone over there?
Sí.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, please.
En su Museo de la Inocencia yo le podría regalar una pintura mía muy inocente de Bilbao.
Yes,
Porque me encantaría, si algún día voy a Estambul,
Just a second, un segundito. Go, now, por favor.
en su Museo de la Inocencia, podría yo regalarle una pintura muy inocente y muy novata mía de Bilbao. Y algún día cuando vaya a Estambul poder verla en su museo. ¿Podría, por favor? ¿Podría regalársela?
Yes, the Museum of Innocence has downstairs a section where we exhibit some of the good examples of gifts people, generous people like you, give to our collection. Thank you so much. The people in the museum will take it and will write your name on it. Also, this should be done legally according to Turkish regulations. Thank you.
So it's just the last person we've got over there. It's going to be the last question. Go ahead.
Okay, buenas noches. Was the last time we met in London, Orhan Pamuk, years ago,
But,
in a beautiful night like this. Was every time I go to Turkey, and I get the impression that Turkish readers have some difficulty with your writings, and so many of them have your books, but so few of them have read actually your books. They leave the books in 15, 16 pages and something like that. And I know that Turkish readers always had difficulty distinguish the person and the writer. And I think it's going the same story, and I think it looks like a difficulty we have to overcome. Of course, if I'd like to ask you if my impression is right, correct, and what we can do about overcome this difficulty.
Difficulty is making a distinction between the writer and the subject?
See, exactly. Turkish people, Turkish readers.
I think it was Umberto Eco who made a joke, words to the effect that the first 20,000 readers know the difference between fiction and reality. After that, they all think all novels are personal memoirs. Mm-hmm. When they ask me, Mr. Pamuk, are you Kemal? I am tempted to say, yes, of course. I only write what I live. That's why I'm a novelist.
You have to say that. Yeah.
You have to say that. Also, there was a funny period in my life. Just before I opened Museum of Innocence formally, every weekend I would go there alone. The museum was more or less finished. And there would be some naive visitors who, seeing the ticket at the end of their books, would also think the museum is already open and would come. And then there is some angry dun, to the museum door. No one is around. I'm there thinking philosophically, metaphysically, how to finish the museum. Then I'm obliged to open the door, and there comes an ambitious visitor, not even looking at me, and then, you're Pamuk, yes. And the museum is almost finished, and where is Fishun? Where is Kemal? Where are their pictures? and I tried, this is a novel, you know. Maybe they're not real people. No, can I see their pictures? and looking around, and then very disappointed that they cannot, this reader who takes the novel so seriously that realizes there is a real museum, or which actually, because of technicality, I couldn't open. And in fact, I was going there weekends to work, to think, to finish it, and it was so delightful. It was out of this, in Istanbul space, but out of some other thing. Then suddenly they're knocking and coming in, not even caring about me, but they wanted to see Kemal's and Füsun's picture. And how many times I tell them, this is fiction, that's the whole point. We are transgressing the line between fiction and reality. We're playing around a bit. They don't like this intellectual talk. And then in the end, I promise next time I'm going to put their pictures or something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome again. Başkan.
Teşekkürler ederim.
Okay.
Orhan Bey.
Ben size çok teşekkür ederim. Maybe I should, and if it's I wanna thank you so much.